You don't have to be a Quaker to be a part of the team. I think maybe 3 of us have some Quaker relations and the rest of us don't. So, and as Mary was saying, there's a single focus for the whole year. The year we started, the focus was auditing the defense budget. And I have to say, we didn't get very far on that one. And then there was a year where we concentrated on North Korea. And then the next 2 years, the last 2 years, we were focusing on repealing the 2002 authorization for the use of military force. And we came very close to that happening. Unfortunately, so many other things were happening in Congress that it was not brought to the Senate for a vote. It passed the House, but it has not yet been brought to the Senate for a vote, which is unfortunate. So, so this year, as Mary said, also we're focusing on trying to have a war powers resolution, which we will explain more about, in terms of Yemen and a war that's been going on now for 7 years. So our advocacy team has, well, all of the teams have a national meeting that happens once a month, and where we have speakers that inform us about a lot of the details that are things going on. And then we also have our team meeting that same night. And then Jeanne and I are also coordinators and have 2 more meetings during the month. Our main task is to lobby members of Congress, our 2 senators, and then we happen to have members both in Jayapal and Smith's district, so we lobby both of them as well. And final thing I'll say is we also write letters to the editor, write letters to the members of Congress. And I did want to say that Zoom has turned out to be a very positive thing for us in many ways, because before we were only able to meet with our local staff of our representatives and senators. By Zoom, we've been able to meet the staff back in DC who are a little more powerful and a little bit more knowledgeable on these kinds of issues. So that's been a positive aspect of being on Zoom. So that's what I'm just going to say. I mean, later on, if you have any questions about FCNL, I'd be happy to answer them. At this time, Jeanne is going to introduce a very short video to get us started.
No, well, Jonathan is, right?
Yeah, but I didn't know whether you wanted to say anything at all about it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. This is a short 2-minute video that I think brings us really up to date, very current about Ukraine versus Yemen, and the background about, we're hearing so much about Ukraine, but Yemen kind of gets lost, in part because the refugees are internal refugees, but also I think there's probably cultural differences that people aren't recognizing or can't identify with. But the unique thing about Yemen is that, and we'll talk about that later, is we as citizens can do something about stopping the complicity the US has in this continuing civil war that's now going into its 8th year. So Jonathan, if you could start, it's just a 2-minute video.
Bombed out neighborhoods, suffering children, millions of civilians driven from their homes. But Vladimir Putin's aggression has still failed to dent the courage of Ukrainian resistance in the face of an illegal invasion.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
But despite the anger we might feel about the war in Ukraine, Washington has limited options in how far it can go to support Ukrainians without also stumbling into the abyss of war.
The way we need to avoid World War III is preventing the United States from having direct military involvement on the ground.
But there is a war in which Americans can make a difference. It's another horrific conflict, which is raging into its 8th year, with more appalling images of bombed-out hospitals and schools, dying children, and millions of displaced civilians. But this war is one the U.S. is not seeking to stop. In fact, Washington is sustaining it, no matter President Biden's rhetoric.
End the sale of material to the Saudis, where they're going in and murdering children and they're murdering innocent people.
In reality, we've done more to enable Saudi Arabia's aggression in Yemen than we have trying to end it, which is why in the region, it's called the Saudi-American War. But Americans should know that the U.S. can act now to end our role in this suffering, because Saudi Arabia can't bomb Yemeni civilians without our support. Their Air Force can't fly without U.S. military contractors. So in this case, we actually have the power to ground the planes and shut off the spigot of weapons that kill and maim civilians and perpetuate this war. Why aren't Americans as loud in our denunciation of Saudi Arabia's bombing in Yemen as we are about Russia's aggression against Ukraine? If we're morally obligated in helping the Ukrainian population defend and protect itself, aren't we also obligated not to facilitate and underwrite Saudi aggression in Yemen? In Ukraine, the fighting could go on longer than many would have anticipated, and the push for peace involves a complex clash of interests where our influence has limits. But the path to stopping the killing in Yemen is clear, and it's within our immediate power. Our justified demand to end Russia's aggression in Ukraine rings hollow when we ourselves help enable Saudi's aggression in Yemen. We can and should do better.
So we can talk more about this video later on, but we thought that it was a good comparison of these two terrible, terrible wars. One that we might not have anything to do to stop it, and the other one we do. So to get us started in talking about Yemen, and I want to say for myself, I've learned a great deal about this small country in the last 3 or 4 months. I don't pretend to be the expert on this, and if you have questions that about what I say, hold them till the end, but I just wanted to make that statement that I've learned a lot, but I certainly haven't learned everything about this. So I'm going to start with, let's see. I wanted to start with this map. Let's see. Can I bring this down? Yes. Okay. All right. So I don't know how much you look at the map of the Middle East, but again, I've learned a lot by looking at this thing and studying it and whatever. And there are some very significant aspects to this. So we see Saudi Arabia and we see Iran. And the other, one of the other countries, the United Arab Emirates, the UAE and Saudi Arabia are two of the most important aspects of the coalition against Yemen. But as you look at Yemen itself and see where this Bab el-Mandeb strait is, which is right there between Djibouti and Yemen. And needless to say, that's a very important strait. 30% of shipping goes through that, that particular strait, and it's only 20 miles between Djibouti and Yemen. So that's one point of potential conflict. And in Djibouti is where United States largest and only base is in the whole of Africa. And China also has a base there, and it's their only base in the whole world outside their country. So Djibouti can be an important point to reflect on. And then, of course, the Strait of Hormuz, up. And if you see that little tip right across from Iran is owned by Oman. So, I mean, why that little tip belongs to Oman rather than the UAE is beyond me. Anyway, in terms of Yemen, the capital for the last 30 or 40 years has been Sana'a, and it is now under the Houthis. The other government, the Republic of Yemen government, actually was pushed down to Aden. Jeanne will talk a little bit more about that. Another point that isn't on this map, but if you look at about where the B is and Mandeb is one of the most important ports for Yemen. It's, it is the port of Hodeidah, and that has been blockaded by the Saudis now for a long time. It's where fuel comes into Yemen, and it's been blockaded by the Saudis. Another thing that is not on the map, but in the eastern half of Yemen is where Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula has their main base in that area. And US has sent drones into that area, and with the approval of the Yemen government that was under Hadi until just recently. So you have Al-Qaeda and United States at odds. You have Saudi Arabia and in particular bombing Yemen. You have Yemen sending missiles or drones into Saudi Arabia and into the UAE. And of course, within Yemen itself, you have the Republic of Yemen government troops fighting against the Houthis. So, I mean, this little country, and it's so complex and so many different things going on. It's really, really quite amazing. Let me just quick look to see if there's just east of Sana'a is the town of Marib, which is where oil is. There is some oil in that particular area, and then yeah, in terms of, let's see. Oh, one other thing down in Aden was the headquarters of the Southern Transitional Council, which is a separatist group that is has been fighting against the government as well as the Houthis. And at one time, it hasn't been very long that Yemen has been actually one country. It was north and south for a long time. And the UAE has supported the Southern Transitional Council. So if that's not enough complexity for you, I can probably come up with some more. I might just say, does anybody have any question or comment about the map that they want to raise at this point while it's up? feel free to unmute yourself, and if anybody wants to talk about it.
Louise, was Yemen ever part of Saudi Arabia?
I don't think so, but I don't know the answer to that. Maybe somebody else knows. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Yemen has a very long history. I don't think it was, but again, I'll have to look that one up, Mary Margaret. Okay, so let me close off this one if I can remember how to do it. I want to bring up the other one. Okay. Okay, so how do I close that off?
You just close it like it's, get it out of your screen like you normally do on your computer.
Okay, but I can't get to my, I can't get to the, all right, okay, let me, okay, here we are. All right, so I want to share this other item. Okay, let's screen. Okay. I'm getting mixed up with the,
You were doing it right. You had your arrow on the right side that would pull it up on the far right.
okay.
There you go.
All right, okay, thank you. Okay, so I wanted to share just some basic data about Yemen to show you, you know, comparable size, etc. So you can see that Saudi Arabia is quite a bit larger, 4 times as large, and UAE is really quite small at 30,000 square miles. The population of Yemen at 30 million, as well as Saudi Arabia, and 10 million for the United Arab Emirates. Language, Arabic. Oh, and I wanted to note that because Iran is such a factor in this whole thing, that Iran is a little bit smaller than Saudi Arabia, but has 85 million population compared to the 30 million for Saudi Arabia. So many more people in Iran than in Saudi Arabia. So in terms of the government, a man by the name of Salah was in power until 2011. Yes, he had been in power for 33 years. So that's saying a little bit about his role, and was replaced by this man Hadi, who was in power from 2011 until just 1 week ago. We know about the Saudi government and the UAE similar to that. In terms of the economy, the Yemen has some exports of coffee, oil, natural gas, salted fish. We know the economy of Saudi Arabia, as well as the UAE. But when you look at what the gross domestic product is for these 3 countries, the comparison is pretty overwhelming in terms of the wealth of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Religion is definitely a factor in what's going on in Yemen. The Houthis, who are the main power right now, are a Shia branch and a particular part of Shia, whereas mostly, you know, almost 2/3 being Sunni. Come Come on. So healthcare, there's just really no comparison with so many of the healthcare facilities in Yemen being destroyed, only half still functioning, whereas both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have national healthcare systems. And the same with food security, second worst in the global hunger index in Yemen, whereas of course in Saudi Arabia, UAE, not a problem. In Yemen, the number who have died in this 7-year war, they estimate as somewhere around 400,000 people. That includes people who have been killed in the war, but so many have died from food insecurity or disease, lack of medical care. And they estimate right now that almost half to, I've heard even as much as 3/4 of the people are living on the edge of starvation, and 2 million children with acute malnutrition. One of the big challenges is water scarcity. And in Yemen, you may remember the cholera epidemic that has broken out largely because of the water, some of the water issues. In terms of the size of the military, ROYG is the Republic of Yemen government forces, which are estimated to be around 44,000. The Houthis, I wasn't able to find out in any way how many people would be considered military among the Houthis. The Saudis, with a very large military, 227,000, the 9th largest defense budget in the world. And there's a very big base in Saudi Arabia, just south of Riyadh, where some 3,000 US military are stationed. The UAE, 100,000 military, even more military, US military there than in Saudi Arabia. So the Yemen Data Project, which is where I got some of this data in the next line, is a very well-respected group. And over these, well, 2021 was, 2021 was the last date that their information was available. But the estimation of the air raids by Saudis in particular, and some UAE, but mostly the Saudis, 25,000 air raids, with the military being the focus in 8,000 of those, and non-military might not have been the focus, but that was the result, as 7,000. Civilian casualties, injured 10,000, killed 9,000. On the other side, Houthi missiles, they do send missiles into Saudi Arabia. I mean, you're aware of the bombing of that one very big oil field in Saudi Arabia. But the interesting thing to me is, no matter, they also have the ability to, to thwart those missiles and drones, whereas the Yemenis don't. And I looked in several places, and the only number that I've come up with, it was 59 civilian casualties in Saudi Arabia over these 7 years, compared to what you see in Yemen. There's a big to-do about how much Iran is aiding the Houthis, and they definitely do give some aid. There's been a blockade of that port that I was telling you, where military aid would come in, and so that's been checked by the UN, and so military aid is not coming in from Iran at that particular port, which is the major port. On the other hand, support for the Saudis is from the United States and the United Kingdom and the other coalition countries. So one of the things that got the Houthis into war in the first place was the economic underdevelopment, and I didn't put it in here, but the corruption that they saw. It's not making the Houthis into this good guys kind of thing, because they've been doing some terrible things in Yemen, but certainly their point was not to overtake Saudi Arabia. That has not been the goal by any stretch. In terms of Saudi Arabia, when they came up with the idea that Iran might have influence in Yemen, this was a big factor in their starting the war. And they also, if you remember, they would like to have an oil line through Yemen to the sea, and so they wouldn't have to worry about the Strait of Hormuz or that other strait that's on the western side of Yemen. So whether those are the main goals or not is anybody's guess, but those are two important goals that the Saudis have had. So anyway, so I just wanted to sort of summarize, again, the complexities of this particular war, in that, you have the Saudis and the Emiratis against Yemen. You have within Yemen, you have the Houthis and the Republic of Yemen government forces. In the south, you have the Southern Transitional Council that wants to be separate and have their own Southern Yemen, and they've been supported by the UAE. You have Al-Qaeda, which is against everybody, and so you have all of these major players that I can see in this area, and plus you have tribes that are doing, their own thing against whoever. So it's not a simple situation, but possibly there might be a more, not simple, but there might be an answer to all of this that we hope will take place. So Jeanne is going to say more about this, and I will get out, Jeanne, and let you.
Did I see that Hassan has joined us?
Yeah, I'm here. How's it going?
Oh my gosh, Hassan, this is, wow. You're going to really help us here.
Y'all are doing fantastic on your own.
Well, thanks. You can give a critique and add everything, but okay. I should tell you, Hassan is a staff on SCNL, and he's actually who we really rely on for all of our information. I saw your interview in The Intercept, and I'm using some of that. I think we'll probably talk about that. But
great.
Yeah. So this will stop other. Yeah, you got to stop your other screen share, and then I'll do mine.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, there I go.
Okay, I thought I had mine up. Oh, this is, let's see, okay. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about two things. One is, how did we get there? How did the US become involved in Yemen? And I'm really relying on an article in Foreign Affairs that was published not quite a year ago by two people that worked under the Obama administration. And one of them, the names are Robert Malley and Stephen Pomper. And one of them currently, he is now the US Special Envoy to Iran. And the title of this article is How America Enables War in Yemen. So that's what I'm going to talk about, like how we got there. So in in March of 2015, the Saudis approached the Obama administration and were saying they were very concerned about what was going on in Yemen because Hadi had been overthrown, and they blamed the Iranians on it. Now, the Obama administration was somewhat skeptical. They thought that Saudi Arabia was exaggerating the amount of influence that Iran has on the Houthis who had overthrown the Hadi regime. And in fact, one of their quotes where they were saying, we knew we might be getting into a car with a drunk driver. And they also were skeptical. They know what had gone on in Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera. But in the end, they thought the US, and this is how many times has this happened in our US history, they thought if the US got involved, things would go better, okay? And that, as it said here, it would offer thoughtful guidance in addition to sharing intelligence, aircraft refueling, weapons sales, and diplomatic cover. So before 2015, it should be noted that Yemen was very poor before the war. It's just that the war has made it much worse, but I think it's the poorest country in the Middle East and one of the poorest in the world. But the Saleh was, in 2011, was forced by protests to hand over the reins to the VP, whose last name is Hadi. And Hadi was supposed to be a bridge to this future, and that things would get better, but actually the economy tanked even worse. And so the Houthis, or they're also called the Ansar Allah, had been fighting the government for 10 years. They started actually gaining territory. Now, it's really up for debate how much the Iranians ever gave in the very beginning. But I think as the years went on, they started supporting the Houthis, probably mainly because the Saudis and the Saudi-led coalition was getting involved. And as Louise said, the Houthis are branches of Shia Islam, which is a minority group in the country. And as you see there, 2014, they gained control of Sana'a, the capital, and Hadi fled to the southern port city of Aden. Now, as I said, the Saudis said that they were proxies for Iran. It isn't like they feared, I think they had that belief. And so they formed this coalition of 9 mostly Arab states. And that includes the UAE, which is where Louise showed you on that map. That's where we have a number of soldiers there. And so then that's where they prepared to launch a military intervention. And their goal supposedly was to restore Hadi to power. Now the Houthis are extremely anti-American. And so the US saw them running Hadi out because they saw the Houthis being an affront to its interest in Yemen and to international law. The fact that Hadi had been supposedly elected, I question how democratically elected it was, but in addition, the US wanted to improve its relations with Saudi Arabia. And it was also around this time the Iran nuclear deal was being negotiated. And so there was concern that the Saudis might interfere with that, but this would be one way the US would have leverage with the Saudis to keep them under control so that they could go on with the Iran, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. So right from the beginning, the Saudi-led coalition resorted to harsh tactics. They bombed critical infrastructures, they prevented imports, and this is not what the US expected, but they continued to refuel the planes, shipping weapons and providing intelligence. In December 2016, the Obama administration announced it was halting an arms sale to the Saudis. But as you can see, it had little effect in your reading in the news that the war kept going on. And then Trump entered office, and then things just, Trump wanted Saudi Arabia to be an even bigger player in weapons sales. As you remember, Trump was real into the business of Saudi arms dealing, etc. But when Khashoggi was murdered, Mattis did arrange negotiations under the UN between the Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition. And a ceasefire Iran, I don't know how to say that, Hodia, was signed, but then Mattis stepped down. And so then the peace process waned. It was just kind of ignored. there's no there's really no disagreement that the escalation by the Saudis has continued to strengthen the ties between Iran and the Houthis. It just kind of encouraged them. And as Louise said, in the 7 years of war going into the 8th year, over 400,000 people in Yemen alone died. Most of those were due to results of the embargo and cutting off flow of fuel, of food, of infrastructure. It's basically almost a failed state today where the people are in poverty. And I asked a young Yemeni woman who lives here in Seattle, about her relatives, how do they survive? And it's mainly on the little humanitarian aid that comes into the country. So it's a horrible situation, and it's considered the worst humanitarian situation right now in the world. Now, why do we care? And I think this has already been said, and those of you who are, if you're a member of FOR, you probably already know this, that without US support, it would be harder for the Saudis to wage war. So right now, to catch you up to what we are supplying, we are currently supplying logistics, when we are currently supplying maintenance and parts for the planes that fly over and bomb Yemen. The blockade is also ongoing. And so and you'll get up to date after I talk about the War Powers Act, about there's now a ceasefire, which is wonderful. And this has been, I think, the second week or third week of a ceasefire. And it's a Ramadan ceasefire that's expected to last at least 2 months, cross your fingers, and possibly it will be extended. And what happened was there were a whole coalition of different groups that were not supporting the Houthis within Yemen, because it's a complicated story, that Hadi actually agreed to step down as president and agreed that there would be this coalition of these, I'm not sure what they call it, Hassan probably could say, it's a council, I think, of different groups that are meeting, that are hopefully going to be negotiating with Houthis, and we're hoping there will be an end to this war. But it's really interesting because the War Powers Act legislation is starting to be talked about, has been talked about in both the Senate and the House, that a War Powers resolution is again going to be introduced. And it could well be, this might be one of the factors why there's a ceasefire. So the reason we're caring, obviously, we're complicit. It's not that if we stopped providing the logistics, if we stopped providing maintenance of the planes and contractor assistance, that the war would suddenly stop, but at least our complicity would be removed, and there's a good chance the Saudis would be much less empowered. And it should be said that this is an incredibly asymmetrical civil war that's by proxy, right? Just to give you an idea, in January of 2022, there were 400 air attacks by the Saudi-led coalition over Yemen. And that was 20 times the drone attacks that the Houthis did over Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So it's just very asymmetrical in that sense too, and we're just making it even worse. So what's the War Powers Act? So that's my next, I'm gonna get out of screen sharing and try to find that thing and then talk about the War Powers Act. So. Did you stop me screen sharing, Jonathan?
You never shared, Jeanne.
You never saw it?
No.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I mean, you did just fine. I followed you with my notes.
I'm sorry.
You don't have to get out of it.
I'm sorry. Well, basically, that's what I said. Well, maybe I should just talk anyway about here I thought I really knew what I was doing here. I'll try one more time. Yemen. Okay, open this up. War powers resolution. Share screen. Share. No, it didn't. Do you see anything?
Not what you want to see.
Let me try it again then. Can you see that?
Yeah, there you are.
All right, I apologize. I have the other. Okay, so the War Powers Resolution is really important when we have to look about how can we make change and no longer stay complicit. And the War Powers Resolution was passed in '73, and it was a response to the Vietnam War. It was that was because I don't know if you remember, but President Nixon bombed without congressional approval in around, was it Vietnam or no, it was Cambodia. And then what they said, the War Powers Resolution was passed by both houses of Congress, and it said that the president had to get specific authorization from Congress. If the president initiates hostilities, must get approval within 60 days, okay? And if there's no war declaration or authorization passed within that window of 60 days, Congress can require the president to end participation in hostilities at any time. And what's interesting, any member of the House or Senate can invoke what's called Section 5 of the War Powers Resolution and get a full floor vote. And as you probably already know, especially if you're a member of 4, under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress, not the president, has the power to declare war. So, and before World War II, both Congress and the president, for the most part, acted in accordance with the Constitution. But since '50, that has not been the case. Truman is the guy that started a dangerous precedent. He called the war in Korea police action. And I remember as a kid that it was called a Korean conflict. I mean, they never called it a war. And I always remembered as a kid, well, what's the difference? And now I know there is no difference. It's just a semantic. In '63, so Kennedy and in '69, Nixon both ignored Congress. And when Nixon bombed Cambodia without informing US citizens, the War Powers Act passed 2/3 majority of Congress. Okay. Now, it has never been used. This is just amazing. You know, even though we've had incursions in Grenada and Kosovo, and AOMS were passed, authorization for use of military force were passed in 2001 and 2002 after 9/11, which basically ended up being a kind of a carte blanche to any president when they call anything a terrorist that was related to 9/11, and they expanded what that meant. So that ends up in things such as soldiers being killed in Africa and people in Congress not even knowing there were any soldiers on the ground in Africa. And that's how bad it's gotten. So in 2019, the War Powers Resolution to end the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen was passed in both the House and the Senate, but Trump vetoed it. This was the first time since 1973 that War Powers Act was ever invoked in Congress. So we're hopeful that with Biden administration and Congress, we know that we can pass it. There's a really good chance of passing it both in the House and the Senate. Now, Adam Smith is in the district that some of us are in, and he has said to us, and he's the head of the House Armed Services Committee and chair of it. And he has concerns about the War Powers Act resolution that's coming up by Representative Jayapal DeFazio in the House, because he's worried, because he's in Boeing, right? And lives in Kent, and the Boeing, he represents the area, the district where Boeing is, that he's concerned that it would include such things as parts and maintenance of a plane. You know, that his argument is if you sell a plane, there's parts and maintenance contract, and you would go against that contract it would not be in good faith if suddenly you stop doing that. So that's one argument he's been giving us, and I hope he can be disabused of that and that he will fully support it, because we're hoping, I kind of doubt he would do it, but it would be, we're hoping he could be a co-sponsor of the bill when it comes to the floor. Hassan, what did I get wrong, and what else should I say?
Very good stuff. That was fantastic.
Really?
So yeah, that was an amazing work. So I guess I would just underline how important Adam Smith is. It's very interesting that he would say, these contracts were done in good faith, but I think you should always remind him that he was the original co-sponsor of 3 NDAA provisions to cut off spare parts, maintenance, logistical support, intel sharing. So you should say, well, you just did this in September. We're just asking you to do this again in April to help make this ceasefire stick for once and for all. So that's all I would really add here. I don't know if folks, I wonder if we could take it off screen share.
Yeah.
And Jeanne, I think we should show that other video. We have a 12-minute video, Hassan, from that talks about this ceasefire and all. And
great. So I actually just wanted to say hi and wish you all luck on your meeting with Adam Smith. I don't have a ton to add here, but yeah, really appreciate all you're doing, Seattle. This is great stuff.
Thank you. I'm kind of amazed you took the time out on a Sunday night to come to our little group.
I wouldn't miss it. Yeah, you all have a special responsibility, and man, Adam Smith, he's got some really good debaters in his district who know this issue inside and out. So I got my bets on you all. So okay.
Thank you.
Good night, y'all.
Thank you.
There's some significant news coming out of Yemen. The UN has just announced a 2-month truce between the Saudi-led coalition and Yemen's Houthi rebels. Joining us now to talk about whether we should be hopeful that the ceasefire holds or not is Dr. Anel Sheline. She is a research fellow at the Quincy Institute. Welcome to the show. Great to see you, Doctor.
Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You recently wrote a piece on this. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen so people can see it. The headline here is "Cautious Optimism Hovers Over New Ceasefire in Yemen." If the Saudis were looking for a face-saving way to end its war against the Houthis, this latest cessation in hostilities may be it. Can you just bring us up to date with what is happening right now on the ground?
Sure. So the ceasefire that was announced by the UN actually followed a unilateral ceasefire that the Houthi rebels had declared, which then was followed by a ceasefire from the Saudi side. So already we had seen the two sort of main primary belligerents in this war, which again is multifaceted. So there are other actors here. But the two main belligerents had agreed to a ceasefire, which I think provided some of the momentum that then allowed the new UN envoy, Hans Grunberg, to successfully achieve this 2-month truce. But again, it's important to keep in mind that just because the truce has been declared, this doesn't mean the war is over. Unfortunately, we often see during wars that the warring parties will use a temporary ceasefire to sort of reconsolidate their positions. And the other recent headline people may have heard about was that President Hadi, who had been the interim president who'd been in exile in Saudi Arabia, who essentially, had almost no power of his own, but was sort of propped up by the Saudis. He stepped down and allocated his authority to an 8-member presidential leadership council, which is comprised of sort of an anti-Houthi coalition of leaders from around different parts of Yemen, militia leaders and political leaders. And so the question now is this leadership council supposed to negotiate with the Houthis, which would be the hope? Or are they a consolidation of forces to fight the Houthis, such that, whether the ceasefire breaks down or at the end of the 2 months when the ceasefire is over, it will simply lead to not only a resumption of hostilities, but an escalation in violence.
Right. And so, Doctor, can we zoom out a little bit? What is the role also of the United States here in either supporting this conflict, facilitating this ceasefire? Because this is one of the biggest humanitarian disasters on the planet right now.
Exactly. So, unfortunately, the U.S. is completely complicit in what Saudi Arabia is doing to Yemen. So, like I said, President Hadi, who was the interim president, who's been in exile and relatively powerless, Saudi Arabia was fighting on behalf of his government, bombing Yemen, blockading Yemen, preventing fuel from entering Yemen at the port of Hodeidah, preventing flights from taking off from Sana'a International Airport. And none of this would be possible without U.S. assistance, because 2/3 of the Saudi Air Force are U.S. made, and they only operate with the assistance of U.S. military contractors. And so if President Biden, or if Congress, acted to say the U.S. is no longer going to support this, the Saudi Air Force would be essentially grounded, and they would no longer be able to run bombing sorties on Yemen. They would no longer be able to maintain the sort of air blockade of the airports in northern Yemen. So this is part of why we may have seen this movement towards ceasefire now, because this conflict has been intractable. The Houthis took over in 2014 and the Saudis invaded in 2015. So it's been 7 years. But the fact that Congress had announced its intention to again try to pass a war powers resolution to end U.S. support for what the Saudis are doing, this may have been why the Saudis were like, you know what, we don't want to be in a position where we can't fly our own planes anymore. Like, you Yemenis need to figure this out before we lose even more face. I mean, Saudi Arabia has already been somewhat humiliated by not being able to win here.
Right.
But it would be obviously much more embarrassing if they were faced with the reality of not being able to fly their own planes.
Mm-hmm. Are there other dynamics on the ground that have shifted that may have helped to create this space for a truce?
Yes. So the part of this also comes out of the fact that the Houthis have demonstrated an expanded capacity to hit targets in Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi. So people may recall in January a Houthi drone strike that hit Abu Dhabi. This was the first time in years, in part because the UAE had previously reduced their involvement in the war. But then once they re-escalated it, the Houthis responded by retaliating. And the UAE has subsequently pushed really hard to try to get the Houthis relisted as a foreign terrorist organization. This was something that they were demarcated as an FTO at the very end of the Trump administration, and the Biden administration lifted that designation, mostly just because of awareness that this would severely impact the humanitarian situation without actually necessarily doing all that much to the Houthis, who are not integrated into international markets. You know, these aren't sort of Russian oligarchs with money parked around the world. These are, you know, their assets are mainly in Yemen. But because then subsequently we also saw an attack by the Houthis on the city of Jeddah, which is the second largest city in Saudi Arabia. This threatened to disrupt a high-profile Formula One race, which was scheduled to take place in Saudi Arabia, which represents the sort of events that Mohammed bin Salman has been trying to use to transform the image of Saudi Arabia into somewhere that's open to tourists and, you know, well, ready for investment. And so, although it was only, you know, the one drone successfully hit Abu Dhabi, others were blocked. And then we had this one very dramatic explosion at an oil facility in Jeddah. But even just those, a single attack really shatters the image of these as places that are safe and secure and somewhere that tourists would like to come. And so it's sort of ironic because Yemen has dealt with, you know, hundreds of airstrikes a day for years. And there's been very little attention. Whereas, one drone hits Abu Dhabi, you have one big attack in Jeddah, and suddenly the Saudis and Emiratis are scrambling to try to impose a ceasefire.
Yeah.
So it's my hope is this realization that increasingly the war is becoming more costly for the Saudis and for the Emiratis. It has obviously been horribly costly for Yemen, but finally the costs are starting to come home. And so the Saudis may decide that it's really not worth it for them anymore to keep fighting.
And can you talk a little bit more about the human beings in Yemen that are suffering? Let's go ahead and put this tweet up on the screen. This is the latest update from the ceasefire. They say this is from the Yemen Data Project. Week 1 of Yemen ceasefire update. For the first time since the Saudi-led air war began in March 2015, there's been a week without airstrikes in Yemen. This is unprecedented. Ceasefire in the air war holds in the first week of declared 2-month halt in military operations. First of all, just remind us of what a catastrophe this has been for the human beings who live in Yemen. And then does this ceasefire come with any relief in terms of the humanitarian situation?
So it does come with relief. As the Yemen Data Project pointed out, this is the first week apparently without airstrikes or none that they have been able to record. And the Yemen Data Project has done hugely important work throughout the conflict, keeping tabs on just the extreme volume of Saudi-led air raids that are being conducted on Yemen. So it's wonderful from the perspective of the people on the ground in Yemen to not be dealing with the threat of bombs falling. But at the same time, much of the humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen is from the secondary effects of the war. So not direct kinetic violence that has killed approximately 10,000 people, but the 400,000 people who have died since the start of the war in Yemen, that has largely been from starvation, from disease, from lack of access to clean water, lack of functioning medical facilities. So, and these are unfortunately all compounded right now, especially the hunger crisis, by the spike in wheat prices caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so we know major humanitarian organizations were already struggling with reduced budgets. They were already cutting what services they could provide to starving Yemenis. And that's only going to be further cut because the price of wheat is that much higher. So in terms of relief, unfortunately, the other side of this, so part of the ceasefire agreement was to allow some ships, the Saudi coalition was going to allow ships to the port of Hodeidah, and especially fuel ships are what is needed because there's been almost no fuel in areas controlled by the Houthis, and to allow flights to Sana'a airport. Again, a limited number of flights only to Jordan and Egypt. But this would be a game changer because people have been stuck in Sana'a and in the area around Sana'a. And it's been very dangerous for people to try to sort of make the overland route. A journey that once would have just taken a number of hours in a car can now take more than a day due to checkpoints or blocked roads or things destroyed by the fighting. So it's just really not possible for the majority of people to escape from these areas, especially for things like medical treatment that is no longer available in Yemen. I myself had a friend who had a treatable form of cancer, but who passed away, unfortunately, because he just couldn't get out of Sana'a.
Yeah.
It's horrific. I mean, the pictures of these babies and small children severely malnourished, many of whom have ultimately perished. It is a shameful situation that the U.S. is in any way complicit. So thank you for bringing us the few signs of hope here that this conflict may be resolved in the near term, and we'll watch it closely. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jeanne. Thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate it, Doctor.
Thank you. If I could say one thing, I would say that that Americans can do something here because Congress did commit to reintroducing a war powers resolution, which passed successfully in 2019, but then President Trump vetoed it. We had Representative Jayapal and DeFazio and Ro Khanna, and then on the Senate side, Bernie Sanders, say they were going to reintroduce a war powers resolution. And the point being that if Americans care about this, call your member of Congress and call your senator and tell them to support a war powers resolution, because that would reassert congressional war-making authority and would tell the Biden administration, Congress is shutting down your ability to continue to assist Saudi Arabia here, and we're going to end U.S. complicity in this war.
Yeah. Well
Thank
said.
you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, guys, call your members of Congress if you care about this. Tell them support a war powers resolution because of this conflict, and also because Congress should have power over whether or not we go to war. Doctor, thank you. Really great to have your insights today. We're grateful.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thanks so much.
Our pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it.
So, any questions or thoughts about this story from anyone?
Does anybody have any questions about what they should say to their representative or senators? It's pretty straightforward. If all you have to remember is invoke the War Powers Act regarding Yemen, that's all you need to say.
Yeah, this is Don. So I and several others are meeting with Representative Adam Smith on coming Wednesday. And so, yeah, I've been talking to a bunch of people, so I think we're largely prepared, but I learned some more things here at this, by your meeting. Thank you. And one thing, you mentioned that someone spoke with Adam Smith and he said that he's hesitant to support a war powers resolution because of because Boeing has a contract which was negotiated in good faith.
No, that was my interpretation. It's just like that. Why else would he be concerned? He's afraid, and you can ask him about this, but he's afraid that the War Powers Act resolution, as presented by Representative Jayapal and DeFazio, it might be too broad to include such things as maintenance of planes, and if they're purchased, that would be part of it.
You mean commercial planes or military planes?
The military planes that we sell, right? That we sell planes to the military of different countries. But that's what he said, because we asked him. Jonathan Brown, who's also an FCNL member, and he's also very active in the larger group. He said he said that he's pushing him on that and asking him to be a co-lead sponsor. And Adam Smith, and if you could ask him that tomorrow, have you reconsidered possibly being a co-lead sponsor, because he signed the War Powers Resolution Act 2 years ago, you know? But if he could be, as Hassan is really pushing us to get him to be a sponsor, because also Adam Schiff is a co-lead sponsor of it, and he's head of the Intelligence Committee. And he wants, if Adam Smith and the House Armed Services Committee chair, that would be very, very powerful in getting this passed very quickly. And so if you could ask him again, and the more we ask, the more likely he might do it. But he said he's keeping in touch with Jayapal and DeFazio about this.
Yeah, and to Hassan's point, asking Smith's staff, if he was a co-sponsor of the three assertions in terms of the War Powers Act, he supported having that, and it was attached to the National Defense Authorization Act or Appropriations Act. If he was willing to do that before, what's his hesitation now? It's not like he hasn't taken a stand. And so, I mean, just if we can push him to make a stand now, that would be great. So it's not like he's not acted before.
So just the fact that you all are doing this is really important to him. He is swayed a lot by his constituents. And so I see a lot of you are in his district, right?
Half of our team is, I think 3-4 of us now with Ben. And then the other half are in Jayapal's, but we meet together, we kind of blend it.
You're with FOR mostly, or other groups too?
No, we're with FCNL.
Oh, FCNL, okay.
Yeah.
Half of the, because he'd be curious, that's what he wants to hear, about that. And I heard that there were some, last year there was a letter from some NGOs, non-governmental organizations, including Oxfam, where they were critical of the Houthis at that time because the Saudis had a lull. But since then, after that, the Saudis were bombing a lot more. But anyway, that was another reason Adam said that Adam Smith said he was hesitant because of that letter. I don't know if you know anything about that.
Yes. Louise and I and Marcia have read it. And Jonathan Brown, who's not here tonight, he responded to Adam Smith by saying, that was a while ago. Things have changed now.
Yeah, that's what I plan to say to him too. So when did you talk with Adam Smith? When did you have this meeting with him?
Jonathan is in email correspondence with him. And that was just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, same with me. A couple of weeks ago, I saw that letter. It's not public, but
that's right.
Everyone knows about it. A lot of people know about it, but it's still not public.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a shocking letter, and
yes.
I too think it's now outdated. The situation has changed, but it is concerning. It is concerning, and we need a way to push back on it. I need. Sorry for the metaphor. We need ammunition with which to push back against that letter.
Yeah. And
I have a couple of questions. Can you lay out the exact legislation that Adam Smith supported last fall? The 3 items, put them in the chat or email them to Don. I think it's really important with Adam Smith to be very specific, to let him know he's being watched closely. Because the other item, that's one, is to get those 3 items, the names of them somehow to the people, or to our group, as well as to the people who'll be meeting with Adam. But the second thing is that I really want to focus on the maintenance of the airplanes as being key. If Adam Smith thinks that it's more important to keep the terms of a contract than to prevent the deaths of the people in Yemen, I think that has to be pointed out in a very pointed, moral way. What's more important?
Yeah.
A contract around an airplane, or preventing people from being killed? Preventing a lot of what goes on with the airplanes also is that the lack of fuel, lack of food, that a lot of these secondary deaths, it's not just people dying from being bombed, it's those secondary deaths from being denied food and not having enough fuel to put the food in the trucks and take it out to where the people are.
Yes.
And so that's where I feel like those kinds of points need to be made with Adam, the real human cost to this thing, and that we don't want this to resume. We want this ceasefire to lead to negotiations and to the ending of this conflict. We do not want this to be this kind of break where they figure out a better way to pursue the war. So those are just the points that I wanted to make here.
I wanted to add one thing in terms of the charitable groups. There, at one point, the Houthis were declared a terrorist group under Trump, and then it was taken away by Biden. But there was an effort by the UAE to have them thought as a terrorist group, designated as a terrorist group. And there is a letter that Mercy Corps, and I think there are 19 charities altogether, and this is just recent, like in the last 2 or 3 weeks, that have expressly said that the Houthis should not be declared as a terrorist group because it would interfere with any kind of humanitarian aid to the people. So, you know, I really question that letter that was back in 2021. I guess I would really like to know what started that, but at least this most recent letter from these humanitarian groups is much more concerned about the people and not cutting off aid to them.
Yeah, okay, thanks for the information. If you could point me to that more recent letter.
I just Googled Mercy Corps and it's right in there.
Okay.
So is there anybody else who wants to share any questions or comments?
I want to comment about that letter, the letter from last year. I heard that who's behind it is Scott Paul, and apparently he's in cahoots with somebody from the State Department who is like a neocon. So I don't know. This is more like a rumor. So I don't know what's going on there. But somebody told me this, that Scott Paul is working with someone who's very anti-Iran in the State Department. And okay, so if anyone else knows about that, let me know, please.
Any other thoughts or questions that people want to raise?
Any idea what the Israelis or other kind of distant actors that we haven't heard about have any involvement?
I don't know. Not that I know of.
Do you think that the U.S. is trying to curry favor with Saudi Arabia because of the need to get Saudi oil into places where the U.S. wants Saudi oil to flow? Is there some kind of way that this messes into the mess with Ukraine around oil shipments from Russia?
I had that question too, Mary, and none of the comment. I only rely on people that know more than I do. I mean, Louise and I are not experts on this at all. You know, it's more like we read as many articles, and Hassan has been educating us. You know, and I had that same question, and it's never come up. I don't think it's an issue. But that's only because of all the reading I've done about what other people think. So.
Can I comment on that? I want to comment on that. This is Dawn. Oh, I should probably turn my video on. Sorry, it's not fair that you don't see me. Oh well. Oh yeah. That, I mean, of course, you know, Saudi Arabia rewarded Trump apparently by increasing oil production to help Trump, and the Saudis, you know, have been punishing the U.S. Biden and will punish Biden more if we take a strict approach to it. You know, so I think it's politically difficult for the U.S. to confront Saudi Arabia. That's just obvious. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to point out there's a letter now signed by over 30 members of Congress, including Adam Schiff and a lot of senior people, that is calling for a reset of U.S. policy with Saudi Arabia. Yeah, and that letter is, that's actually a big deal because, but they're calling for a reset of policy with Saudi Arabia because of that the Saudis have refused to increase oil production. Also, the Saudis have talked with China, negotiating with China to possibly pay for oil in the Chinese currency, yuan or whatever it is. And I suppose there's some other reasons that they listed, including the murder of the journalist Khashoggi. So anyway, I think there may be an anti-Saudi sentiment in Congress, and so that actually might help stop this war.
I have a question about that. Does anyone have access to who the 30 members of Congress are? Because I read an article about the fact that this letter was written, but I couldn't find a reference to who the signatories to that letter were.
I can find, if you put your email, I have the list of signatures. I have some of the list. I can forward you what I know about it.
Okay, if you can forward that, I have, all I need is the names of the signatory, the people who signed it. It's just hansonmary@hotmail.com.
Is there a Hanson.Mary, Hanson, one word?
It's just hansonmary@hotmail.com.
Okay.
One word. It's like, yeah. And Hanson is spelled with an O.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think it's really important for those of us who are in Pramila's district to thank her for the role that she's been playing in this. It's not like she needs us to have her back, but I think it's just right for us to thank her. We have a lot of focus on Adam Smith, and rightly so, but I just didn't want to leave that particular stitch out of this. Any other questions? You can use the raise hand in the, let's see, and okay. I'm not seeing other questions in the chat. Let's see. Are there any other questions? I realize this has been a really dense program, but really good, really high quality program.